So welcome to class 6 on the Schools of Karma and Spiritual Astrology. Again, today's class is on the 12th house. I've changed the schedule a little bit. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Again, you all know how to contact me. Let's start by invoking Ganesha, God of astrology. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapataye Namaha, Om Ganapataye Namaha, Om Ganapataye Namaha. Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvina Vatitamastu, Ma Vidvishai Vahai, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let us be together, let us eat together, let us be vital together. Let us be radiating truth, radiating the light of light. Never shall we denounce anyone, never entertain negativity. So welcome Carol from Colorado. We've got a great dog. Bonnie and I are big dog people. Darinka, I think she may come. Elizabeth is in Malaysia and is sleeping. Christina in the Philippines is sleeping. Partha's back from India. Good to have you back in San Jose. Sunarol is coming to us live from Mumbai. Good to have you. Varsha in South Africa usually goes to sleep, and welcome Varsha. And Catherine today is not joining us. She's got some other thing going on. Wayne is busy babysitting for his 1-year-old. And Helen has some work to do today, but I know she sent her regards. And John is busy with his family as always. So so I changed the schedule a little bit. As you know, I always schedule too much for every week. So I decided that this week we would just spend a full week on the 12th house because it's such a rich house, and extra time we can put into analyzing your charts and analyzing sample charts, which we never get to do enough of. So, and then next week I'm going to do multiple levels of existence. I started putting together that slideshow, and it's work in progress. It's totally new material, that I have to kind of make up from my experience. And I'm hoping, depending on how that goes next week, I'll also probably see if I can get to difficult karmas or things that you should be able to look upon when you pull people's charts up, like 22nd Drekana and 64th Navamsha and Mitra Bharga, which is a issue for medical astrology, and things like that, Bulika and things like that. You should know about those things because sometimes they're the only things happening in the chart that's a real problem, and if you don't know to look for them, you miss, why the person is going through a difficult time. I'm visiting my dad the weekend of June 25th, so it's a holiday weekend, time for you to study. Final class will be on July 2nd. What I'm thinking of doing now with that final class now, and I'm hoping you guys will cooperate, is trying to do some workshop and synthesis. So often we don't get enough time to kind of put together all the pieces. So before the class, I'm going to give you some guidelines for like analyzing and integrating the material that we've learned, and then I'm going to ask you to apply what we've learned to your charts and maybe make a presentation on your chart. I think we all learn the most. Sometimes astrology is very difficult to translate, and if you get a live person who knows astrology and they're explaining the subtle nuances of how their 12th house works, or how something is working in Gemini, or what's going on with their 8th house in terms of how it's manifesting in their life, it's probably the best learning experience we can have, rather than, because sometimes astrology is very abstract. So I'm going to ask you, and hopefully you won't be too shy, I'll turn over the presentation to you and ask you to kind of present your chart and the things that we've learned, and obviously help you with it. And let me know if you have a problem presenting. Some people are really shy and they just need to stay in the background, but and certainly don't skip class for that reason, but I think the richest classes we can have are when people share their charts with us, give us details based on um, and also what we've learned. So the other thing, you could also present a friend's chart or a family member's chart that may illustrate things that you want to see. So I'm hoping that we can use the last class to kind of get more concrete examples, and and I'll give you some guidelines for doing that. So that'll give you a chance to study everything that we've learned, to review it, and to apply to your chart. So my new class starts 2 weeks later on July 16th. And multiple levels of existence. Again, you can see a lot of these courses are kind of very unique, and no one's going to teach you this stuff. What's happening in this new class, actually, too, and I'm adding some things that people never do. I'm adding the solar chart. There is a valid Vedic perspective from reading the chart from your sun, and there are times that you want to do that. And sometimes if you don't have a birth time, you have to read the chart from the sun, because that's all you need to do that. So I'm getting that to the first week. So we're going to do foundations, which are just kind of realizing that the karma that you bring into this lifetime that affects the whole lifetime is in your natal chart. It's the most important thing. And then we'll spend some time on the moon chart and the sun chart, which no one ever teaches. And then we'll move to the nakshatra matrix, a couple of weeks on the Navamsha chart, and then moving into Jaimini astrology and the charts that reveal our life purpose, and then how we appear to others. And then something that really needs to happen a lot is this idea of rotating charts. People get so stuck on looking at the chart from just one house. And the chart is always rotating, and that's not only based on your dasha period, but there are these sign periods. So, for example, I'm currently in a Pisces period, which in Jaimini astrology, which is connected to my 5th house, and my 5th house is my strongest house, and so it does bring up a lot of really wonderful. That's why I'm teaching astrology now, because it's connected to Jupiter and Pisces. But so understanding a little bit of some of these alternate dashas and how the chart is rotating around these dashas, and it rotates one sign every 1 to 12 years, and it's very important for realizing that we're just not static creatures. The charts rotate. When you read a chart, you've got to rotate the charts, because what's happening now is based on the chart rotation. And then something that's also rarely taught on astrolocality, when you move, if you live in a foreign country, you have to read the chart from where you're living, and you'd be surprised how powerful it is to do that. So we'll learn all those things, multiple dimensions, and I'm kind of excited about that class. That'll take us through September 10th. I have a class on Vedic psychology scheduled for January. I'm thinking of doing a class on spiritual astrology in September, and co-teaching with Robert Koch, and it's kind of a development of this lesson on what we're doing today. So kind of excited. I've just thought about it today, so we'll see what happens with that. So let's move to the next slideshow. Hopefully that's the right one. Okay, I did an edit on this slideshow, and I don't know if I closed off the other one. So I've got 2 of them up here, so I didn't mark them. I usually do that, so this way I have to. So well, I can still do it from the original slideshow. I just had re-edited the last version. But let me see. This is probably the new one. Yeah, okay, this is the edited one. Okay, so let me call this 6A. Okay, so And I just want to remind you where we're going with this class. In some ways, even when I started the class, I wasn't quite, I kind of knew where I was going, but I didn't totally know where I was going. And my purpose has been to kind of give you deeper meanings of everything. I find that that we have to avoid cliches as astrologer. I mean, oh God, you're a Gemini, so you're dual think, you have these qualities. People sometimes do very superficial things, and I was trying to give everything that I've been teaching you, the meaning of aspects, the meaning of planets, the meaning of signs, is to force you to kind of translate everything more deeply, because and then the whole thing really comes down to our final class is, can you apply everything that you've learned to translate deeply into developing a richer description of the chart, so that and it's real easy to go into something superficial. Oh, you've got a lot of planets in the 12th house, you have a lot of expenditures. Yeah, that's probably true, but as you'll see from the slideshow today, 12th house is so rich, and if you said something like that, you wouldn't be doing justice to it. So, and our core issues of karma we studied before are very connected to Saturn and Rahu and Ketu, and now the core karmic houses 6, 8, and 12 we've been focusing on, and these are the houses that we need to kind of understand the most in order to kind of help people transform them. And we haven't talked about good karma from like the 5th house or the 9th house, which could be in another course. And people usually don't call you with problems with their good karma. They don't need a reading if they have a blessed life. They call you when they have problems with all these things that we've been talking about today. So I'm not focusing on the negative. I'm just trying to help us to understand and help translate karma that can really help aid suffering. Our deeper issue, purpose in this course again is to is always connected to spiritual astrology in a sense. So this is our most spiritual lesson in the class, because all astrology is spiritual, and again, the purpose of astrology is because we want to know why we're suffering. We want to be released from suffering. We want moksha. So the purpose of lesson 12 is understanding what is binding us from preventing us from being liberated. So we've been moving toward this, and my whole purpose in astrology is to reveal the puppet string so that you can be released and not buy into your emotional patterns. Okay, so any quick questions? We did a little laundry work here. Any questions before we start?
Yeah, Barry, I had just a few, since we're on the topic of the 6th, 8th, and 12th house. So, the last time we were talking about when malefics are in their own houses or in others' houses, so the Lord of the 6th and the 8th and so on. And are these, are you looking at them in terms of Viparit Raja Yogas?
Right.
And
right. We'll go over that a little bit more today. Yeah, we have these kind of, it's very funny. I mean, the Indians kind of paint over these Lord of the 6th and the 8th and Lord of the 12th and the 8th, and they call them kind of, oh, these are good things to have. But when you do charts and you talk to people, and they're going through planetary periods connected to those periods, they end well. In other words, like maybe somebody will have an accident and get a bunch of money from insurance, and that will, take care of them for the next 20 years. So, that could be a Viparit Raja Yoga, but, it's still like they've gone through this difficult 8th house karma of having an accident. So, I mean, sometimes it's not that dire if you get benefics involved, but, so often, again, like everything in Vedic astrology, you have to see you look at so many different things to really judge the quality of, how challenging it is or how beneficial it is. And, sometimes you can have like totally good things coming out of the 8th house, like we learned last week. I mean, I won $25,000 in a contest, when I was running an 8th house period of Ketu, Saturn Ketu. And you just, if you really thought about it, you could see it in the chart, but it's not something, that jumps out at you. So you really always have to be kind of open. Those kind of yogas can bring good things sometimes, but then we have to judge the quality of, what nakshatra it's in, where is it in the Navamsha chart, what are the aspects, if the malefic aspects are being overridden by the benefic aspects. Eventually you have to kind of look at all those things, even in judging those yogas.
Great. And the other one is that so when a planet is debilitated and retrograde, is it canceled? And when the planet is exalted and retrograde, it also gets canceled?
Well, that's complicated. I had some slides on that in the earlier thing, and actually, I think you bought that extra class, I have like 3 lessons on that. It varies. I think I pointed out that if you get an exalted planet that's retrograde, what it means is that externally it produces good results, but internally the retrograde makes you feels like it's debilitated. And our life is so subjective. So what that means is, sometimes we're fine, the planet is producing good results outwardly, but we feel terrible about it, So like I have an exalted retrograde Saturn. Now, I have a lot in the 12th house.
Okay.
So my experience with that is, and it's pretty complicated because you have to also look at the house involved. My experience with that is like I have all of the exalted Saturn qualities, which are very, very high spirituality, love of meditation, all these wonderful things with the exalted Saturn. But inside I have a lot of unconscious fear and uneasiness. So even though my exalted Saturn produces external results, on the inside, I don't feel good about it, you see. So retrogrades of exalted planets may cancel the ability to enjoy the fruits of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to record the lesson.
Yeah. So the 12th house, what's the 12th house? I'm going to mute you guys. Okay. So the 12th house, is kind of a planet. It's a kind of a house of suffering, and on the other hand, it has all these wonderful qualities of it. All planets kind of suffer in the 12th house, except for Venus, because she likes her sexual conquest, but that can lead to problems too. Sun is particularly bad in the 12th house, Marnakastaga. The natural 12th house is zodiac is Pisces, which is a place of moksha. Karaka for the 12th house is Saturn, which is connected with sorrows, but Saturn's the most spiritual planet. Again, we suffer so that it points us toward God realization, and that's why we're here. So, if we understand and do something about our suffering and find meditation and spiritual practice and service work, then everything is fine. And that's what Saturn does. So that's the deeper meaning of the 12th house. And the 12th house is also connected to Ketu and Moksha. These are probably the things that you need to always come to mind when you ever look at somebody's 12th house, because again, in Vedic astrology, everything has multiple meanings, and you have to kind of remember to pull out all these things from your shopping bag, and then foreign places too. Sometimes you'll look at a chart and you say, oh, something is in the 12th house, or there's some association with the 12th house, and it may just mean they have a connection to a foreign land. I see that so much. So, you shouldn't immediately jump to, oh, you've got 12th house, this is horrible. Don't ever do that to anybody, because everything is always good in astrology. You just have to find a way to express what it means. So the deepest level of the 12th house is the loss of the material level, leading to merging with the infinite for moksha. So the Vedic culture treasures the 12th house most because they're interested in getting off the wheel of karma and getting liberated. And so that's why the 12th house is the best house from their perspective. In the Western world, where suddenly we have huge expenditures and we end up in the hospital and funny things like that happen, it's not a picnic, and we're losing the material level, and it's harder for us. So we have to kind of really understand the secrets of the 12th house. So when the 12th house is about losing our individual identity to gain freedom, and that one of the secret words for the 12th house is sacrifice and seva. The 12th house is a house of doing service work for others, of charity. And if you have ever been involved in working for a charitable organization, I'll recommend that you do that. You find that when you help others, your problems go away because you see that other people have bigger problems. I mean, think your marriage is bad and work at a battered women's shelter and find out what these women are going through. When you serve others, your small ego melts away, and you gain something bigger. So we lose our individual identity to gain freedom. The 12th house is kind of one of the clairvoyant houses. It's a house of intuition, a house of dreams, and it's the house of sleep. It's where the subtle mind is active. It's very connected to the subconscious, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It's also a place where we develop power through isolation. So meditation is an important keyword to think of from the 12th house. We go on a meditation retreat. We go to the ashram. 12th house is ashrams. The dark side of the 12th house, if the 12th house is afflicted by a lot of malefics or things are poorly placed, then you're dealing with hospitalization and mental institutions and prisons. But you probably don't do too many charts where you get people like that. But it certainly can come up. And you have to know both sides of it. Is it the ashram is kind of a prison in its own right too. I mean, it's a wonderful prison, but it's a place of isolation. The 12th house also represents blind spots in our personality, and we'll talk about that. And that's, I think that's the deepest thing we can do in this lesson is can we uncover our own blind spots by understanding what's going on with our 12th house, because we don't see our blind spots, and the 12th house is a house of hidden enemies. So sometimes you get people sniping at you at work and reporting you at work for being late or doing things out of those are 12th house affairs, hidden enemies. 6th house is overt enemies. You know who they are. 12th house is hidden enemies. And we'll be spending a lot of time. I sent you that wonderful article that I wrote today on blocks to moksha, and we'll spend a little bit more time going into that. And it really needs to be like a 2-hour class, but you can only do so much. 12th house is deep subconscious churnings. And the problem with the 12th house is that it has this kind of ineffable quality. We can't get a handle on what's going on, and that's because we have this like past karma that's like under the surface. It's not obvious to us. It's hidden. And we just don't feel good about it. Emotionally, we feel repressed or something, and we can't put our finger on what the hell's going on. And that's because it's just like deep stuff, and sometimes it explodes on us. And then it's also said 12th house is foreign places, and we have to remember that because sometimes you get a lot of 12th house associations in a chart, and it's about foreign countries or being connected to foreign things. So planets placed in the 12th house experience loss. So like moon in the 12th house, loss of mother, mother's not at home, sense of separation from mother if your mother was home, not feeling connected to your mother. The 12th house is a place where we feel lonely and separate. It's a place, sometimes we choose to be lonely and separate by choice. We go to an ashram, we want to get away from the world. We escape to a foreign country, we want to get out of where our home is. We end up in the hospital because we haven't dealt with our subconscious patterns, and they manifest into serious illness, and it forces us to look at why we're sick and in the hospital, because we've, haven't dealt with our emotional baggage. Prisons, obviously, and mental institutions are more extreme examples of 12th house. They're, when people just, have deep antisocial patterns and problems that they can't even control, and that's when you get, really afflicted 12th house things, Rahu and Mars, and Saturn in the 12th house and Aries or something complicated like that. Then you get kind of those kind of really difficult karmas. 12th house is also the house of financial losses and expenditures, and this is the most common things that people talk about, and it's true. I'll just tell you, if you watch your transits in your chart, in the 11th house, you're making money and everything's great. You've got to put that money in the bank because suddenly all the planets go into the 12th house and expenditures come out of nowhere. And suddenly all that money, if you spent it too quickly, is gone and you need it. So watch your 12th house transits. The 12th house transits will bring up expenditures. They will bring out all the issues that we've talked about too. I have, in Scorpio rising, so my 12th house transits usually happen starting in October when the sun goes into Libra, and then the other planet's going to follow it. And the fall is always kind of a low period for me because I'm going through all this 12th house stuff. So you can watch your 12th house transits and prepare for them. I mean, what you should do when you have 12th house transits coming up is either go to the ashram, go on a meditation retreat, take time, to be alone by yourself, avoid too many expenditures because you're going to have a lot anyway, and that's good. Now, Rahu, Venus, Jupiter, and the Moon will, and even Saturn, Rahu, Venus, Jupiter, and the Moon will cause heavy expenditures, but Saturn is said to control expenditures in the 12th house. My chart, because it's retrograde, I tend to get all these expenses because of Saturn in the 12th. 12th house is a house of intuition, compassion, and spiritual transcendence. You're advised to serve here so that you don't have to suffer. Now that's the key to the 12th house. If you want to unlock your 12th house, you have to give to charity. You have to do service to others, and it's the secret for getting out of your own stuff. When we help others, then we get out of our ego and we do stuff. The other thing that I didn't talk about is 12th house sometimes is connected to marriage. We always think the 7th house, the house of relationship, is marriage, but marriage is often 12th house. There's a planet, in Jaimini astrology, there's a thing called the Upalada, which is connected to the 12th house, marriage is about sacrifice. We sacrifice our lives. We work hard for our kids, and that gives us, a certain degree of freedom. So, sacrifice, service are the keys to getting out of the 12th house. So, if you have 12th house problems, you have to kind of do seva. You have to do service. You have to help others. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. The 12th house actually has a lot of gifts also, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. Sometimes planets in the 12th house give you these hidden talents, and what happens is we can't access them, especially when we're younger. And what happens is if you're a strong person, your deepest deficit and problems, and you work on them, they become your assets. And there's studies of planets in the 12th house, like Mars in the 12th house. Mars in the 12th house usually is not good. People have trouble, going into action. But you'll find that in the charts of a lot of great athletes, they have Mars in the 12th house because they've taken their problem and they've worked harder and they've turned it into a talent. So the key with the 12th house is to take your deficits and to turn them into talents. And that makes a lot of hard work. And it's hard to do. Sometimes 12th house stuff creates a lack of clear direction in life, confusion. If you're going through a lot of 12th house transits, that happens. Sati Sat, Saturn goes into the 12th house, it immediately starts creating a lot of confusion about your life, wanting to change everything and everything falling apart. And that's typical of 12th house. It creates confusion. If you have like your ascendant lord or I have my Atmakarka in the 12th house. Maybe it can make you shy, unseen. Again, the key word for 12 is unseen, insignificant, anonymous. Things caught in the 12th house. You said the sun likes to be seen, so it likes to be in the first house, or particularly in the 10th house. You put the sun in the 12th house, it's hidden. It's no one sees who it is, and it suffers very deeply. So 12th house planets, usually you find that people have to, people feel shy or insignificant, low self-esteem, anonymous. Those are important things. And, I'm talking a lot about the 12th house today because people come to you with problems, and they, often they're 12th house problems because they're really deep things, and you have to really know how to help them. Saviors and martyrs live in the 12th house. I use I've been involved in this myself. Like in my Atmakarka is in the Saturn in the 12th house, and I spent a lot of my life just doing service work, and in a sense sometimes that has led to, I used to call it savaholic martyrdom. You totally give up yourself for some higher cause, some spiritual cause, and it's a good thing because it's a path to moksha, and it allows you to overcome your personal ego, and sometimes it can be way too afflicted and it can create problems. And so, I live in a community where some people, have worked 40 years as doing seva, and they're beautiful people, but the university doesn't have a pension program for them, and they've been doing, making, maybe $300 a month, and they have, if they have problems, they're not being taken care of. So sometimes you have to find a balance with service also. If you become a martyr in service, then it can create a problem. So you have to be aware. We'll talk about that when we do Baudica in the Vedic Psychology course, because ninth house Baudica can be kind of that kind of martyrdom for a spiritual cause. Sometimes in the 12th house, your psychic boundaries may be too porous. You're an easy mark for predator, or you're a predator yourself. And then what happens usually, if you're dealing with normal people in the normal world, people can't deal with 12th house problems, and they get stuck, go into addictions. They go into drugs, they go into alcohol, especially with Rahu in the 12th house. And there's this deep psychological, emotional churning, and you don't know what to do with it. And so you don't have, if you don't turn to meditation, if you don't have psychological tools to clean that out, you can't deal with it. So you get drunk, or you take drugs, or you get involved in sex addictions or something, because that's the only way you can handle 12th house deep churning. So it's important to understand these things, because when you look at people's charts, you see the 12th house, it's usually that kind of deep stuff. The 12th house is things that you cannot see. They're invisible. They're hidden enemies. They're perverted logic of your own subconscious. You just can't get a handle on them. And if you can, I'm very lucky. I've done a lot of work with subconscious patterns, and I have healing modalities to deal with subconscious patterns. And because I have a stationary Jupiter in the 8th house, aspecting my 12th house, I see my subconscious patterns quite a bit, and I'm very blessed, and I'm able to bring them to the surface to heal. But most people can't see them unless you have something like a huge benefic there. So the key with the 12th, the 12th house is, just from an astronomical point of view, is the place where the sun's just coming up, so you can't see the planets there. It's an astronomical phenomenon, and that's why things are lost in the horizon. They're hidden from view, and that's why the 12th house is so difficult. It represents our blind spot. The 12th house is a place of self-undoing. Sometimes if you have 12th house going on, it can be self-sabotage is a good word for 12th house, depending on, you've got a malefic there. You may just be beating yourself up too much. You may be preventing yourself from advancing. you just, and it's an unconscious thing, these unconscious patterns are such that, like, on the surface level, we want something to happen. On the subconscious level, we're negating that. I do a lot of work with this. I'm very amazed when you come up with these subconscious patterns. On one level, you want this to happen, and it doesn't. It's kind of like your New Year's resolution list. You want to lose weight, you want to be a good person, and all these things that you write down on your New Year's list. But how many of them manifest? Because there's self-sabotage going on. These are unconscious patterns in the 12th house. 12th house represents our blind spots. They're things that we don't see in ourselves. They're these kind of self-sabotaging patterns in our life. And sometimes they're, the word shadowy is a good word for them because that's what's going on with the subconscious. Um, um, we're out there, they're ineffable, we can't quite see them. I mean, I have Saturn in the 12th house, and I said it's kind of retrograde, which gives it a debilitated quality, and I have a lot of unconscious fear, and over the years I've been able to kind of move through it, and on some levels it still rules my life. And a lot of it comes from my dad being in a concentration camp, and there's a connection between him and my 12th house. But it has created a kind of a deep, shadowy, unconscious, uneasy feeling my whole life. And that's sometimes what happens with 12th house. You just can't get a handle on what it is, It's just this kind of shadow. Sometimes, like, let's look at Mars in the 12th house. Mars is the archetypal warrior. He wants to move forward. He does well in the 10th house. Again, Mars doesn't do well in the 12th house because people with Mars in the 12th house have trouble setting boundaries, being self-assertive, and then they get angry all of a sudden. 12th house, I always like to use the word repressed. I think, you find people that repress their emotions, Moon in the 12th house, or they repress their fame, in a sense, being proud of themselves, Sun in the 12th house. Mars in the 12th house is like repressed anger. It's kind of like it suddenly explodes, and I think whenever I see 12th house in people's charts, I always have to talk about you're repressing these qualities. You've got to find a way to let that out, otherwise it's going to explode. And what happens is, we'll see next week, when you don't deal with 12th house, then it explodes. It explodes into illness. You end up in the hospital. It explodes into mental breakdown. It explodes into not being able to cope in the world. You have to run to the ashram and just meditate, to get a handle on it. So you have to find a way. The key to the 12th house is expression rather than repression. So that's kind of the key there. 12th house is kind of like having wounded children, special needs children. They've suffered critical deprivation. They've been usurped, denied, shamed. Sometimes 12th house is connected with shame or guilt. It's like, depending on the planet, maybe Saturn would do that. And you have so much shame or guilt that it just bottles you up, and it blocks you from being, fully human. And so we always have to get things out of the 12th house, because they get, they explode if they don't. So I use the key as like blocked expression. 12th house is prison, and I always say that which imprisons you enlightens you. If you get in touch with your 12th house karkas, what's imprisoning you, then you can express them, and you can get out of jail. Otherwise, they're kind of like keeping you in prison your whole life. And see, 12th house stuff, 12th house karma doesn't go. Remember, we learned 6th house karma last week. If you're disciplined and you go on a diet, you get your exercise, you take care of your health, you can work through it pretty easily. You just have to be disciplined. 8th house stuff is harder because it's really past karma. And sometimes it's a little bit more uncontrollable, but it can be controlled, if you, through good karma and meditation and things like that. 12th house stuff is the deepest karma because A, we can't always figure out what it is. B, even when we know what it is, we usually can't act on it because it's like we're in prison with it. And, I'll share some stuff. I have 12th house issues with Saturn in the 12th. Um, and, you can work on it your whole life. And if you can get through it, you get enlightened. That's part of my lesson in my article. So some examples of planets in the 12th house. And again, we learned, from the beginning of our class, we should also look at signs. So if Aries owns the 12th house, that would be like Taurus rising, or if Mars is in the 12th house, those are kind of similar things. So remember that, that you have to transpose signs and houses sometimes. Or looking at the natural 12th house Karaka, which is Pisces. So when you get Mars connected to the 12th house, you may fear expressing yourself, denying your ego, not expressing your competitive drive. Sometimes we applaud that, but then, as you know, a lot of women divorce men now because their men are wimpy. Their men are not in their full Mars energy, their full males energy. So that's an example of when Mars energy is blocked and denied, then in the 12th house, then, it isn't going to be very successful in relationship either. Pluto, we learned about Pluto last week, or Scorpio, again, if you're Libra rising, if you're Sag rising, Scorpio owns the 12th house. Pluto, you may feel repressed about expressing passion or your sexuality or your power. That's Pluto on the 12th house. Mercury in the 12th house, or 12th house ruled by Gemini, which would be Cancer rising. You decide to keep your mouth shut. You don't express what you need to say, and this causes problems. I did this for many years, and I developed a tumor in my throat, which was benign, luckily, but it was because I was expressing what I needed to say in my relationship. So when we don't express what we need to say, it gets bottled up and causes 12th house problems, right? Uranus or Aquarius in the 12th house. Again, Aquarius in the 12th house would be Pisces rising. I cover what makes me different and keep my creative genius under wraps. Again, Uranus, one of the key words is inventive, creative genius, associated with Rahu and technology and being a great inventor. And people with Uranus in the 12th house or Pisces rising, they fail to express their creative genius, and that keeps them like perpetually in like jobs that don't pay very much, and then they feel like totally trapped because they're not expressing their talents. Venus in the 12th house of Taurus or Libra. I don't know how beautiful, how sensuous, how artistic or loving I can be. If Venus, when Venus gets repressed, it may not feel beautiful enough, or it doesn't express its sexuality enough, or the higher level of Venus being artistic, creativity, or love, it may repress love. So even though Venus in the 12th house is one of the good placements for Venus, it's still kind of may become too sexual but still not feel loved enough. So that you'll see that in people's lives. 12th house tends to create victim consciousness. Whatever the rejected planet or sign, the subconscious awareness of this loss leads to kind of victim consciousness, and we feel morally right and sorry for ourselves. This is a huge thing. I have a friend who has victim consciousness, and that's because she's not able to see herself. These are her blind spots. And 12th house creates kind of a victim consciousness. And this person is always blaming. She gets into all kinds of difficult problems. She calls me every week with some crisis, kind of a drama queen kind of situation. And she never ever admits or takes responsibility for anything that she has done. It's always the other person, blame, 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 blame. So blame gets connected to the 12th house. And obviously Saturn is about responsibility, and Saturn's the Karaka for the 12th house. So the key with getting out of victim consciousness is to take responsibility. And you have to kind of, when you get victims, and you'll get them a lot during readings, you have to kind of, you can't always be nicey-nicey, and you have to just say, please, can you share with me how you're responsible for what has happened? When we work on next week, everything that happens in our life is our responsibility. We've created it, right? That's kind of new age psychobabble, but it's very true. And if we don't ever take responsibility for the stuff that's happened, and it may be responsibility from a past life, then we end up being like in victim mode, and we get pretty stuck. So I'm going to pause and take some questions. So fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it's truly amazing. So, Barry, so like from what we've been discussing, and I did some of the reading, my whole thing is that how do we know what frequency a planet in the 12th house is manifesting? Like in the sense that is it, leading one towards like, the ashram, or is it leading one towards, the hospital, or to sexual addiction, or constant travel? Like, how do we sort of gauge that?
Yeah, these are, again, we haven't been teaching basic astrology, and, I'm in the 8th class, we're going to have to kind of, I'll give you a checklist, but you have to take everything that you know and judge it. Okay, so basic things that we forget. Whenever we have a benefic connected to the 12th house, again, association means could be planet in a nakshatra, exchange of houses, a benefic planet aspecting the 12th house, benefic planet in the 12th house. So benefic planets will kind of lift up, Jupiter or Venus or a positive Mercury will lift up things to a positive value, right? If you have like, full-fledged malefics, like there's no benefic influence, let's say you have Saturn debilitated in the 12th with Mars and Rahu and stuff like that, those are kind of extremes. Then you have to start thinking, if you don't get rid of your repressed anger and your repressed fear, you're going to end up in jail. You've got to deal with that, So those are kind of the extremes, but, the benefics will uplift it. The benefic associations will uplift it. And the malefic, without the benefic associations, then the planet is more vulnerable. But you have to look at the context of somebody's life. I mean, I do a lot of charts of spiritual people, and I had one recently, and the person's going to go into a 12th house period, and he's got Jupiter in the 12th. Well, he's a very devotional person. Obviously during that period, he's going to be with his guru at the ashram. So you can kind of look at the context of somebody's life, and if you don't know somebody at all, you kind of get a sense when from the reading and you're talking to them, what's going on anyway, what their life is about. So, but there are surprise 12th house things that come up. I mean, my 12th house is protected by a stationary Jupiter, and I still go through incredible mental anguish every time I go through my 12th house transits. So I think the benefics allow you to overcome the 12th house things, and the malefics, without a benefic upliftment, kind of like, help. And again, that also could be house placement, because Lord of the 12th and the 5th, the 5th house gets hurt, but the 12th house Lord gets uplifted by being in the 5th house, right? So you have to remember all those basic astrological things,
would that also be the case when the 12th is in the 4th house as well?
Yeah, I mean, when the 12th is in the 4th house, we'll go over that in a minute. There's always so many colorations with everything. The books give you these cookbooks, but then you always, we have to kind of practice, and I actually meant to create a slide on this. We'll definitely do that for lesson 8. How do we go microscopic in judging something? And what I look at is, well, you know, you know, certainly exaltation, debilitation, friend, enemy. You've got to look at, you have to look at those kind of relationships. You have to look at, is it connected to benefic? Is it connected to a malefic? Where is it in the Navamsha chart? Is it strong in the Navamsha chart? Is it a good house in the Navamsha chart? So, sometimes, I mean, I have a friend who is an incredible astrologer. He's very deep. He's got Jupiter in the third house debilitated, and if you did his natal chart when he was 25 and you told him he's going to be a great astrologer, you would be missing the fact that he's got Jupiter and Pisces in the first house, in his Navamsha chart. You see? So there are all kinds of subtle things that you have to look at. And then if I get to it, in one of my classes, you've got the Dasha tapes, I'm teaching about the D60 chart, and there are deities associated with every 2 degrees, and they can be a final judgment on the kind of quality karma that's going on. So you always have to look at so many things. Yeah, I mean, Lord of the 12th and the 4th may hurt the 4th house, but it may uplift the 12th house because it's going into a Kendra, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And I have that in my chart. I have Lord of the 12th. I have Lord of the 12th and the 4th. I have Lord of the 4th and the 12th. So I actually always have good luck with houses, but I have incredible expenditures around them, So it's kind of like, it just takes a lot of experience to learn how to translate all the 1,000 shades of gray. Very good question.
Thanks.
Okay, other questions? Okay, so how do we unlock the 12th house? And I think, it's always cruel to tell, whenever you're doing a reading, you always have to have a remedy. You can't tell somebody that, they're doomed and they're going to suffer for the next 20 years. They're in a Saturn period. You have to kind of eventually, you have to learn remedies, and you have to learn good remedies. I tend to be very practical and Western about my remedies because I don't, you get a lot of clients who don't want to do Vedic yagas or do chant mantras and things like that. But, so I've developed a whole repertoire of things like that. But, how do you redeem the 12th house? People, and it's hard because when you're going through 12th house stuff, it's, you tend to kind of shy away and maybe not even ask for help unless the agony is really difficult. And sometimes you just create extreme behaviors that put you in a problem situation. You go crazy with frustration and anger. You end up in a hospital bed, and that forces you to reflect on how you got there. But you want to help people from getting there. And this is very true. I mean, I have a friend who I mentioned to you who's, suddenly became a meth dealer because she ended up associating with a guy from the bad tracks, and she's a very spiritual person, and suddenly she's like going to go to prison, you have to kind of, I mean, I don't know if you can warn people of their tendencies and they're going to get it, but sometimes you can see that in a person's chart. You're coming into a 12th house period, you're going to need to kind of learn to meditate, you're going to need to become involved in spiritual practice, you're going to have to work on your subconscious patterns, or you're going to, feel like you're going crazy a little bit, and I think the key to the 12th house, though, ultimately is, sometimes there are no cures for the 12th house. And the 12th house cultivates surrender. Thy will be done. It's like Pluto. When you get hit by Pluto, we learned Pluto last week or the week before. Pluto is about thy will be done. It's about surrender. If we sometimes, if we give it to a higher power, if we give it to God, then God comes through for us. The Guru comes through for us. And sometimes we just have to take this deepest stuff to a higher power. Even 12-step programs, that's what they're about. They're like giving it to a higher power. I can't deal with my alcoholism, my drug addiction. I need, God, I need, you need to take this, And that active surrender is an important technique for 12th house. I think that doesn't really say very much. You know, 12th house is about sacrifice, and we said one of the keys to unlocking the 12th house sometimes is just doing more service work, getting beyond our personal ego, helping other people, and then that gets us through our karma. And you know, I think I wrote an article last week on giving, you know, when you have problem planets, you give charities, you give money to the charity connected to the problem planet. So if you've got Moon in the 12th house, it means maybe you weren't a good mother in the past life. You've got Moon aspected by Saturn or Mars, maybe you were an abusive mother in the past life. And so to get out of that karma, you give money to mothers who are, you know, homeless or having trouble taking care of their children, or donating to orphanages or things like that. And all that, that's one way of kind of dealing with the karma. You can see that, and you know, you should read that article. And we actually, someday I'll develop a whole lesson on remedies. But we have to learn practical remedies to give to people. I give that charity remedy out a lot because, you know, people might not want to do Vedic mantras to Saturn, but you know, you can get them to donate to a veteran women's shelter on a Monday. You know, so you know, that's one way to look to free 12th house. Sometimes you can give charities connected to the 12th house. But we also have to realize that 12th house is beckoning us to new spiritual realms. So what that means is that when you get people who haven't started meditation or have not found a guru or have not come to spirituality for a Western person might be going to church, you know, or something like that. If these people are dealing with difficult 12th house issues and suffering, it means, and they're not on a spiritual path, that's what they need to do, because it's turning to God, learning meditation, going to church, going to the mosque, whatever, you know, whatever is going on in their spiritual life. 12th house will respond to meditation, to yoga, to spirituality, and it's actually the best cure, because the whole purpose of the 12th house brings out deep suffering, but it wants you to find God. So if you take drugs and alcohol and get caught up in sexual addiction, then you know you're eventually going to bottom out and maybe find God, but all those things are moving you in that direction. If you can help people move people towards spirituality when they have 12th house issues, you're getting ahead of the game. And 12th house people who are spiritual, you send them to the ashram for a meditation course, you know. 12th house is a little bit like a trust fund. It's you know, it's like there are these treasures that are locked in jail, in 12th house is prison. And if you can help people unlock their 12th house, then it leads to incredible development and talent. Again, 12th house is about maturity, sacrifice. If you get caught up in weakness and whining, why is this happening to me? I'm just a victim. Everybody's against me, okay? That's not very empowered. These people have to get mature. They have to get responsible. They have to think like, oh God, I'm the cause of this problem. I need to do something about it. I need to redress the people I've hurt. You know, there has to be self-awareness and humility and spiritual responsibility. Those are really key words here to memorize in helping people with 12th house. Self-awareness, humility, and spiritual responsibility. If people don't get that, then they end up being victims, and they end up, you know, in addictions and stuff like that. So you have to help people become aware, become humble, to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did this, 12th house requires surrender, right? So you may have to surrender to your enemy, but it lets go of what's going on. Spiritual responsibility. I love that word. The 12th house treasure will never disappear. We have to unlock it. I mean, it's there. It's locked in jail. We have to release it from jail. People who have studied the 12th house, I mentioned this earlier, 12th house has a strong correlation with career success. You wouldn't think that. Everybody looks at the 10th house for career success. But if you can unlock your 12th house talents, it can bring incredible career success. Actors, politicians, and journalists who are very successful have Jupiter in the 12th house. Scientists and doctors, Saturn and Mars in the 12th house. Painters and musicians, Venus and writers, and the moon in the 12th house. So sometimes you have to kind of coach people to get out there. I know, and this is kind of true in my life. I have. Hey, welcome, Kathy. Glad you can make it. So, like, I have Venus and Saturn exchanging houses between the 3rd and the 12th house. And I mentioned to you, I'm really a great poet, but I don't write. So I'm like not fulfilling my talent to express that. Lately, I'm writing everyday astrology, and that's my poetry. So that's how I'm getting out there now. But you have to encourage people who, when you see 12th house planets, you'll find that there's like hidden talents there, but they're afraid to express them. So you have to like encourage them and coach them to like get out there and paint, get out there and write poetry, get out there and do that. So, and if you do, then you unlock them from prison. Our greatest weakness is our greatest strength. Unlocking great potential for success. So that's a really key phrase. Our greatest weakness is our greatest strength. So stuff in the 12th house is sometimes our greatest weakness, and it becomes our greatest strength. You'll find that, as I used in the earlier example, that Mars in the 12th house made the person maybe fail in high school as an athlete, but it was such a deep wound that they worked really hard, and now they're in Major League Baseball, and they're a great baseball player. So when you see 12th house in young people's charts, you have to encourage their parents and themselves to kind of work on those things. The stuff in the 12th house is there to unlock. So that, I always use this phrase, that which imprisons you enlightens you. If we can unfold our 12th house, we get enlightened. I'm going to take some quick questions while I drink some water here. Maybe, in fact, I'm out of water. I give you all. So we've gone 1 hour. So let's take a bathroom water break, run to the refrigerator break, and come back in 3 minutes. And I'm going to do that myself, and then we'll reconvene, okay? On break, for those of you listening to the tape, you haven't lost audio. We are taking a 3-minute break. Okay, let me know if you're back. Um, the rule is if you call a 3-minute break, people take a 5 or 10-minute break, and you can never get people back together again. But while we're waiting for everybody to come back from break, let's take any questions. Now the articles I sent you 3 articles on the 12th house. One is one that I wrote this morning. When I send you articles, it allows us to get through the material a little bit more quickly. Sometimes it allows me to flesh out the material in a more coherent verbal way. So when I've been writing an article for you every week lately just to kind of do that. Sometimes the other articles, I like them, but they're almost not worth spending a lot of time on. Like the Kenneth Johnson article that I sent is, I think it's really brilliant, and then when I really thought about it, I'm not sure it said that much. It means, the gods must be crazy, kind of like there is this kind of like hidden craziness in the 12th house, which is kind of a hidden beneficiary. I think it's a really beautiful point, but I kind of wanted you to read the article, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I think I sent you one more, and I can't even remember which one I sent you, but it's kind of supplementary material. Okay, Sonara's back. I don't know who else is back. There used to be this thing where you could raise your hands. Okay, I'm going to assume everybody's back because it's actually 5 minutes, and continue. So the thing about 12th house stuff is that it's very deep, and you may not even unlock it in this lifetime. But I think that's why we're here to work on 12th house stuff. And I think it can be a lifelong journey, and it could be lifetimes of journey. And I mentioned, talked a little bit about my Saturn in the 12th house. 12th house is also connected with pleasures of the bed, orgasm, the pleasure you derive from sexual life. You put Jupiter or Venus in the 12th house or Mercury in the 12th house, the benefics, the person's going to kind of do well with, joy from sex. Malefics will create problems in the bed. People rarely come to you and talk to you about their sexual life, but you should, just be aware that's another aspect of the 12th house. Venus is the only planet that does well in the 12th house because it likes spending on luxuries. So I think that's a problem. I mean, I find people with Venus in the 12th house, they tend to spend too much and they get into debt and they have all these beautiful things, but they're not happy. And so that's why I say I don't think even Venus does well in the 12th house. And Venus does well in the 12th house because we need procreation to create new people on the planet. So she's important in that respect. We wouldn't all be here without sex or the pleasures of the bed. So it's important for continuing the next generation. It's an important part of our life. 12th, Sun and the Moon in the 12th house can create problems with eyesight. 12th house is the left eye. Again, we'll talk a lot about 12th house as the house of moksha. If you have planets like Jupiter or the Sun or the Moon or Saturn aspecting the Moon, those are good indicators of striving toward enlightenment. And those create very spiritual people. And that causes problems. When you get Saturn and the Moon connected, people get depressed, and then they can't deal with their depression, and so they search for God, they search for meditation. Ultimately, you start meditating, you start yoga, you get over your depression. But so some of these things are kind of innate. They move us toward spirituality, and that's their whole purpose. Suffering moves us toward enlightenment, toward spirituality. We talked a little bit earlier in the class about the retreat, Yoga's 12th house. Um, um, you know,
Barry, I had a question. What about the 12th Lord in the 12th? I mean, does it uplift the 12th
yes,
Lord? How?
yes, we'll talk about that. That's the next slide. Yeah, that one's called a, I've got it here somewhere. It's coming up. Yeah, Lord of the 12th and the 12th is good. Yeah. I mean, again, you always have to look at, people get very superficial with astrology. They'll say, oh, you've got Lord of the 12th and the 12th. Well, is it afflicted by a bunch of malefics? Is it in a bad nakshatra? Is it debilitated in Navamsha? You see, is the depositor of the 12th house in the 6th house? You see, we tend to kind of get very superficial in looking at just one thing from these cookbooks. We've got, I think we've all grown up with cookbook Jyotish, and after a while you realize, people are much more complicated, and you can see the complications in the chart, but you have to look for them. So yes, Lord of the 12th and the 12th is generally good, but is it afflicted by malefics? Is it afflicted by benefics? Is it benefited by benefics? Is it connected with good nakshatras? Is it strong in the Devamsha chart? Is it strong in the D60 chart? So go deeper, okay? Other significations of the 12th house, agitation of the mind. That's an important one because people, moon in the 12th, Mercury in the 12th, afflicted by malefics, people just get very agitation of the mind. Assassinations, insomnia, problems, sleep problems are going to be in the 12th house. Cessation of activity, when is something going to end? Well, it's the 12th house. 12th house from anything. It's the cessation of activity. Spiritual retreats, donations, charitable acts, loss of spouse. Again, we said 12th house is very connected to marriage. So, 12th house periods, 12th house afflictions in transit by malefics in the right sequence could cause loss of spouse. 12th house secret affairs. It's another place you have to look at for affairs. Discharge of debt, also connected to the 12th house. We talked a lot about seva and service being the positive aspects of the 12th house. I wouldn't overemphasize that because people tend to talk about the negative aspects of the 12th house, expenditures, but it's all about sacrifice. So placements of the 12th house ruler, this is cookbook Jyotish, and a lot of, again, you have to look at all the different colorations. We have to do some practice on your charts in a little bit. Lord of the 12th and the 1st, you may have problems with ego. You may be shy. You may live away from home in a foreign land. That's anytime you get the 12th and the 1st house connected, you get foreign connections. Lord of the 1st and the 12th, Lord of the 12th and the 1st, right? Foreign connections. Lord of the 4th and the 12th, change of residence, problems with mother. Lord of the 12th and 7th, marriage to a foreign person, marriage problems or divorce. Lord of the 12th and the 10th, sudden changes in career connected to foreign countries, career connected to hospitals, intuition, meditation, prison. So, you're right. Sonara asked a really good question. You have to kind of somehow find a context to put what to say. I mean, but usually you know the person, or they tell you enough so you know what context to use. In the Trikona houses, again, they'll hurt the Lord of the 12th and the 5th will cause problems with children, separation of children, or the 12th and the 9th will cause problems with father, but may lead one to looking for enlightenment. I've got a connection between the 12th and the 9th house by aspect. Okay, Lord of the 12th and the 6th or 8th of the 12th. So problems, Lord of the 12th and the 6th, problems with work and enemies and co-workers. Problem with Lord of the 12th and the 8th, interest in past lives, astrology, hidden secrets. Again, here's what I was looking for. Lord of the 12th and the 12th is of Amala Yoga, success abroad, the ability to control successes. So again, if it's not afflicted, Lord of the 12th and the 12th is great. That's where you want it. It still may have deep karmic turnings for you, but it's still good. Connected to the 3rd and 11th house, problems with trips or siblings. This is all Cookbook Jyotish. You can look it up. I went over this already at the beginning, but we want to get back to this. 12th house should be talked about as sacrifice, service, sacrifice in marriage, quest for moksha, unblocking karmic patterns, losing the material for God realization. You know, those are the positive ways to talk about the 12th. And you have to find a positive way to talk about it. Let me see. I'm thinking we should maybe look at your charts a little bit and then come back. I've got a bunch more stuff, but I don't want to get too abstract. And again, if you can help, we've got Partho's chart up here, so we'll start with Partho. We missed him last week. Partho, and also if you can share your experiences, you know, also about 12th house. I want people to kind of verbalize what they're seeing in their 12th house. So let's look 12th house. So Partho is a Gemini rising. No planets in the 12th house. I mean, there are some other things, and we haven't learned those things, but the Aruda Padas are in the 12th house, but we're not going to go there. Those Aruda Padas are connected to career, home, and family and money. So no planets in the 12th house. 12th house Lord Venus is in the 5th house with Mercury, the Lord of the chart. So let's look at the subtle things. Venus is in the 9th house with Ketu, giving us spiritual orientation toward Venus. So again, it's a benefic planet. It's connected. It's in the 9th house in the Navamsha chart, spiritual house, connected with Ketu, spiritual channel. So Venus, Lord of the 12th in the 5th here, 5th house is a spiritual house, house of mantras. So there's a deep connection between spirituality. So we're seeing an example of the higher 12th house energies coming out in this chart. And then the challenge of Venus in the 12th, the challenge for Venus in the challenge of Venus in for Geminis is that it looks for love. Venus wants, because Venus owns the 12th house, it doesn't feel loved enough, and so Venus searches for love in romantic relationships, in marriage, and in whatever way it can. Sometimes people get very sexually active in a way, but you know, this is very positive with Venus in Libra in its own sign. So Lord of the 5th and the 5th may negate, will just bring out really higher knowledge in the spiritual realms, and maybe even attraction to spiritual women. But often, if you have an afflicted Venus for a Gemini, they have major problems with relationship. In marriage, they have major problems with broken romance, things like that, and that becomes kind of a hidden problem for them. So anyway, Partho, do you want to add anything? I don't know if I hit everything, but it just... It's also in the D60 chart, it's in Brahma, it's in good Shastyansha, so that's lifting it up also, so that's good. Partho? Do you want to say anything? Your mic's on, but I'm not hearing anything. Okay, we'll move on. Carol, I'm going to look at your chart lately. And let me, do let me know if somehow I've got the wrong chart up here. I think we had a problem with Sunrise before. Carol, got Mercury in the 12th house in Aries and an enemy side in Ketu's Nakshatra. Lord of the 12th Mars is in the 4th. So we've got Lord of the 12th in the 4th. In a friend sign, and Venus is Nakshatra. In the Navamsha chart, we've got Mars in the 1st and an enemy sign of Virgo. And then in the Shashyamsha, the D60 chart, we've got it in a good deity, Amrita, so that's lifting it up. I would say that Mars in the 1st house is not a real problem. So to me, what comes to mind about your 12th house Lord is his relationship issues. His 12th house Lord in the Vamsa charts in the 1st, opposing Venus. So it seems like the major issues to be learned with the 12th house are connected to relationship. If you read ahead in my slides, I talked about how Taurus is one of the signs, because Mars owns the 7th and the 12th, which is naturally brings up relationship problems. So the relationships problems become a block to moksha at some point. And those of you who know in Vedic astrology know, Mars, Mars is always a difficult planet for Venus-owned signs with relationship, because it can be too aggressive, it can bring too much ego into the relationship, it can attract men who are too sexual. I mean, there are all kinds of possibilities. In your case, Carol, Mars going into the 4th house would suggest either eventually having a home in a foreign country, Lord of the 12th and the 4th. And again, Venus is the chart Lord in the 1st here in a positive yoga, so Mars and Venus is nakshatra is powerful. But I'm not quite sure what to think about Mercury in the 12th. Mercury is a benefic, is a happy planet for Taurus, as it owns the Lord of the 5th. So again, the 5th Lord going into the 12th is problematic, but again, the 5th Lord does uplift the 12th house, and it is a benefic. Anyway, so Carol, do you want to share anything about your 12th house things or anything I said? Okay, Carol.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So I think you pretty much have a good, accurate description of my 12th house situation. I have had my share of relationship issues, but I would say that I'm pretty stable now in a relationship sense. Also, as far as Mercury, when I was a child, I was kind of one of those, don't talk out of turn. I was raised in that kind of a environment, so I didn't speak a lot, and actually, because I had some difficulties with my eyesight and my hearing, and I had a speech delay, I think my parents thought that that I had an intellectual deficit, which I do not. So it's been an interesting journey because of some of those things. So yeah.
And see how Mercury in the Navamsha chart, which is later in life, is in the 9th house in Taurus. So it's, your later life has brought, has worked you through. I mean, one of the things you often have to look at is that if you see stuff in the natal chart, where is it in the Navamsha chart, which is often ripening after 36 to 40, and if it's still afflicted there, then the problem continues in later life. And if not, you're able to work through it. And yeah, that's good. That's wonderful because yeah, good.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to Sonara. We have to do some of the people who aren't here too, but remind me to do Varsha's chart. But since you came, you get to go first. Okay, now I think you're not soybeans. Okay, I think we got the right chart now. So, so we've got an exalted Jupiter in the 12th with the moon. You know, and Moon and Jupiter like to be together, and they're actually good planets for Leo. So again, we do have a benefic, an exalted benefic in the 12th. So that's positive. That's where you talk about guru at the ashram, you know, and I think I mentioned that to you earlier. Lord of the 12th, the moon is in its own sign, right? You were asking about that, and that's a positive yoga. It means, you know, being able to control expenditures. It means luck with foreign countries and all those things. So Jupiter being the karaka for spouse means that maybe you will marry a man from a foreign country and certainly be in relationship with a man from a foreign country. I think you shared with us that before. If we look at the Navamsha chart, Moon goes into the 3rd house later in life. Jupiter goes strongly into the 1st house, suggesting if you know that later in life you do get more involved in teaching and being a guru. You've got the 2 guru planets in the Navamsha chart in the 1st chart. So your gurudom is coming with Jupiter moving into the 1st house. Like I mentioned, my friend, who's a great Jyotishi, he's got Jupiter in the 1st house. Maybe you'll be a relationship counselor in the sign of Libra and with Venus. So, you know, you can see how that might play out, but we'd have to look at other things for that, but it just kind of jumps out at me. Anyway, I'm not sure what else to say. Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I also have an obsession with foreign places, especially distant foreign islands. And I think it's probably, I don't know, I was just thinking because my moon is in Cancer, which is like a water sign.
Right,
and I feel very happy near water. That's this thing. I have an obsession with foreign places, yeah.
Yeah, I do too. I've got Jupiter aspecting my 12th house. You know, so yeah. You know, look how many foreign students I have in this class. I mean, it's like, I think I have 1 American. I have 3 Americans actually, but out of 11 people, well, actually, anyway, it's interesting. I have a lot of luck with foreign things too. Okay, Kathy, let's look at your chart. Kathy's 12th house lord is the moon. Moon's in the 5th house, so it gets uplifted. Leo rising. Let's see. Let's look at the Navamsha chart. Moon goes into the 6th house, which is you know, here's a case where the Navamsha placement is more difficult later in life, so maybe that's connected to taking care of your mother, who's a little bit more sickly now, creating more emotional strain, and needing a need for discipline to kind of get through it. What's any aspects on the 12th house? No. Saturn? No. Rahu? No. So 12th house is pretty unafflicted. So I would say again we have more of the positive qualities of the 12th house coming up. So again, we're not looking for hospitalization or imprisonment, or you know, certainly ashramdom could happen if you had a spiritual orientation. You'd have to look elsewhere. But look at the Shastyamsha. Well, someday we'll learn this. The moon is in a malefic deity, Kantaka. I did just have that one recently. I forgot what it means, but yes, there's 60 of them. You can't memorize them all. Sometimes you have to, but I have a book and I look up all the deities, and that can color the karma of that. So I would say your 12th house karma is more complicated, but again, putting the Lord of the 12th and the 5th, it's uplifted. But I don't know if you have any children. I would think that there could be emotional separation from children because of that, and Venus being the Lord of the nakshatra in the 8th house could create some problems. So I don't know if do you want to share anything, Kathy?
Hi. Yeah, I sort of puzzled over what the 12th, especially the Cancer, if there's a mother or being a mother connection there. And you're right about more challenging obligations with my own mother right now. Not sure what else to say.
So do you have a child, Catherine?
Yes, today's her birthday. That's why 16th birthday. That's why I missed the first hour.
That's right. You told me that.
But,
and you have a daughter, right? Born in the 5th, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So far, so good in that area.
There's an emotional challenge connected with your daughter?
Well, her father just passed away 2 months ago.
Okay, that's huge.
But maybe it's part of that.
We have Saturn going through Sagittarius in transit, so that hasn't helped anything.
Right.
Right. Okay. Great. Okay. So let's do Varsha, and then we have to move on to the rest of the lesson. Okay, here's Varsha. She was born in South Africa. Again, Sag rising, exalted Jupiter in the 8th. 12th house Lord Mars is Scorpio. It's got Venus in there. In Saturn's nakshatra. 12th house Lord Mars or Ketu. Whenever we deal with Scorpio, we have to decide whether the primary ruler is Mars or Ketu, and the planet that has more planets with it is more important. So Mars is conjunct the Sun and Ketu is alone, so Mars is the ruler of the 12th house in the 2nd. And in the Navamsha chart, we've got Mars wonderfully placed in Pisces, a friend sign, in the 11th with the friend, the Sun. Venus is in Saturn's nakshatra, and Saturn's in the 9th house. Expositor Mars is in the 2nd house. Okay, so what can we say about the 12th house here? So we said Venus. Venus is the planet that does best in the 12th house. It's good for spending and luxuries and pleasures, and there's a connection between the Lord of the 12th and the 2nd. Sometimes and you have 2 malefics in the 2nd, there may be difficulty in saving money because of expenditures. So I think one of the blocks in this 12th house may be reining in shopping tendencies. I don't know if any of this is true or not, but that's kind of what comes to mind. In the Vamsha chart, Venus is in the 8th, where Mars is in the 11th. So again, then you have to judge the context of what period she's in. Okay, I think she's in a Saturn period or ending in Jupiter period. Saturn period. Okay. One of the techniques in the next semester's class is that we'll learn you have to rotate the chart around the chart lord, the dasha lord. So now we have, basically in the Saturn period, she's got Jupiter exalted in the 12th, which brings the same thing we have with Sonaral, which means, joy in foreign countries, luck with spiritual wisdom, gurus at ashrams and things like that. So in the Saturn period, when we rotate the chart, the 12th house, becomes a little bit more beneficial. Although in both cases, she's got benefics in the 12th house, so it's good. Okay, let's move on to the rest of the lesson. Any quick questions? Okay, I'm going to mute you all. So this is kind of repeating, Saturn's connection with the 12th house, which means suffering leads us to moksha. Saturn's Ketu is connected to the 12th house, which should make us, it should draw us towards spirituality. If we don't, then we miss the boat. Like Mother Teresa had Ketu in her 12th house in her natal chart. 12th house, again, is deep psychological and conscious patterns. A lot of this course is, I'm very interested in psychology. I've made the orientation of this class around Vedic psychology and understanding how people work, because if we understand ourselves and others, then we can help change our patterns. And the 12th house brings up patterns that we can't see. They bring up paranoias, worries, and unconscious fears, ancestral patterns, another part of the 12th house. So that's the problem with the 12th house, is sometimes we don't know what's going on, and sometimes it can take a lifetime to understand it. I think even after all my years of, I totally understand my 12th house now, and yet am I able to do the action to get through the problems of it? No, it's hard, it's, and I know I need to do all the things, but it's hard, and that's how 12th stuff. Malefics in the 12th house can create insomnia, nightmares, sexual dysfunction, lack of sexual enjoyment, problems with the eye, poor eyesight, problems with the feet. 12th house is feet. 12th house is also the lymphatic system. If you know your lymph system, probably it goes from your feet to your your underarms and your breast area, and lymphatic problems are connected to the 12th house. 12th house problems, the one that comes up for most people is loss of money, heavy expenditures. If you see you're going through a 12th house dasha, if you see that you're going through a lot of 12th house transits for a long time, Saturn going through the 12th, Rahu going to the 12th, you've got to save your money ahead of time, otherwise you're going to get hit. And I have a horrible problem with expenditures. Saturn in the 12th, it's like my biggest block, and I can manifest a lot of money, and I manifest more expenditures. And no matter what I do, I just have to cut at buying absolutely everything. And I've taken a long time to learn that, but it's out of control. Benefic planets in the 12th house provide sustenance during difficult times. We talked about that. We want Jupiter in the 12th. It provides substitutes during difficult times. I have a good friend. She's in a Jupiter period with Jupiter in the 12th. Now, she's not making a lot of money, but she's taken care of. Somehow everything is, she's able to kind of get by and feel okay. And that's what Jupiter can do. It can protect us when it's in the 12th house, or it aspects the 12th house. 12th house supports humanitarian or charitable work. And so benefic in the 12th house, it should encourage people to do charity work and service work. Sometimes remedies for the 12th house we've talked about. One is getting people into spiritual practice. People who aren't into spiritual practice, we're dealing with the unconscious. You have to send them to psychotherapy, hypnosis, astrology. I don't recommend hypnosis, but sometimes people do well with it. journal writing, working on one's dreams. Those are all traditional psychological methods for unlocking the 12th house. And I like that stuff. It works. It's not for everybody, but some people are going to do well with it. I mean, air signs do better with that kind of work. Libras, Gemini owns the 9th. Gemini's, particularly Aquarius, Mercury owns the 5th. Gemini owns the 5th. Those two rising signs particularly do well with psychotherapy and astrology and analysis and writing and things like that. So that's good. Okay, we've talked about moksha. We're going to talk a lot more about it. Planets in the 12th house. Again, this is kind of cookbook stuff. I put it down for you in writing. You've got the slides for it. I don't think we need to waste our time on it. But we actually need to kind of memorize this stuff. In fact, I'm not going over it, but, when you see Saturn in the 12th, you immediately have to think, sexual dysfunction, need for spiritual discipline, path of service. It's good to memorize this stuff, but I don't want to, it's here in writing. I want to go over deeper stuff. Rahu in the 12th is worth talking about because that's a deep one. Rahu in the 12th can create deep psychological dysfunctioning, overindulgence in sex, problems with addiction, problems with the astral world, problems with sleep. Rahu in the 12th comes up a lot in people's charts, and you kind of need to, really be able to help people with that one. Ketu in the 12th is one of the better placements. They need to be involved in spiritual community and ashrams and things like that.
Paris, I just wanted to ask, if Rahu and Ketu are in the 12th and the Navamsha, would it be exactly the same significance, or would it be even more intense or less?
You always start with the natal chart, and then you move to the Navamsha to see, you see what's going on in their later life and how it's being colored. I think with Rahu and Ketu, you really have to focus more on the natal chart. I don't spend too much time with Rahu and Ketu in the Navamsha chart. It's important on some level, but it's really it almost would require almost a 2-hour talk. It's serious.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can't even answer that now, but I think for our purposes we should just focus on Rahu in the natal chart.
Rashi.
Yeah, in the Rashi. And then I threw in Uranus and Uranus and Pluto here because we have to start knowing them. So the mystery of the 12th house is that it should pull us towards moksha and towards enlightenment. And that's why the 12th house sometimes creates this kind of undertow and this pull toward the void. And part of the problem when you get the ascendant lord or key planets like the Dasha lord going through the 12th house, it's like you're getting pulled into the unconscious, you're getting pulled into the transcendental value, and it's like it's very uprooting because you're getting taken out of the material world. And you've got to help people understand that. And to go with it, they have to go into meditation or psychotherapy or things like that. The challenge of the 12th house is that, it's very painful and disruptive. If we get in touch with its deeper meaning, we can really kind of transform it. The 12th house stuff requires faith. This whole thing about surrender to God, when people are going through 12th house dashas, 12th house associations, there's this kind of dark and mysterious storm about the unknown. They just don't know what's going to happen, and they're very frightened. And so, they will survive, but you have to kind of help guide them out of the darkness, and to understand that it's just part of leaving the familiar, the hero's quest. He leaves the familiar to go to a foreign country, 12th house, and in that process he gains insight into himself. It's not, Andre Gide said, one does not discover new lands without consenting to lose sight of the shore for a very long time. So, going to a foreign country, which is 12th house, is a way of new self-discovery. Odysseus, went on this whole odyssey, left his country and went to this huge quest, and he came back this much better person. So 12th house journeys are to the unknown, to foreign countries, and they take us to new realms. Pass on that one. 12th house tends to make us more reclusive. When we go through a 12th house, I have one of my best friends went into she's Leo rising, she went into a moon period. Moon owns the 12th house. I can't get her to return a phone call, to return an email, to return a text. I have to go over to her house to make sure she's okay, and then she apologizes for not communicating or being reclusive. She just wants to be alone. And it's just part of what happens during a 12th house dasha. You just want to be alone. I'm going through a 12th house Bhukti period. Saturn's in my 12th house. I'm in Rahu Saturn. Rahu is so outward, but Saturn is in the 12th is so inward. I barely go out of the house now. I haven't seen a lot of my friends. I just happy to stay home, and that period's ending. But it's about reclusivity, and I think in reclusivity we discover more about ourselves. And so it's okay. You don't want to make people wrong about it, but you have to. That's what's going on. 12th house is a time out. Even if 12th house sometimes creates death, right? Even if we die, life goes on. We're not special. We learn that we're spiritual beings. There's no such thing as death anyway. But even people disappear into the hospital, they disappear into prison, they disappear into the ashram, we lose touch with them, and their life still goes on. We don't see them, they become unseen, but they learn that they're not special. It's kind of, in a sense, that's kind of what imprisonment is, right? They go to prison, they thought they were special, a good criminal, and now they're in prison, and now they're like no one. 12th house reconciliation. This one lady, I don't know if I sent you this article by Annie Whittaker. She said, I do not wish to minimize how terrifying it was to lose my personal power during the 12th house. And yet you learn such humility. So the thing about, the bad 12th house stuff is that sometimes if you end up in a hospitalization and you end up out powerless, it does humble you and it crushes the ego. And again, that's the same ego that wants to be crushed to get moksha. In most people's lives, they may not have a life of moksha, but they're still learning about sacrifice and having their ego kind of force into surrender. I sent you this article. I like this thing about The Gods Must Be Crazy, the Daemon, by Kenneth Johnson. I don't want to go over it. I gave you the article. I like that idea that 12th house is kind of like a guardian angel. I think that's really kind of a brilliant way of thinking about the 12th house Lord. He's our guardian angel. We wonder, where is our guardian angel in Vedic astrology? It's the 12th house Lord. He's working on getting us enlightened and taking care of us, and so he kind of sometimes creates all kinds of crazy things in the process. So 12th house is hidden enemies. This is cookbook stuff. Signs in the 12th house. We're running out of time. I want to get to the moksha. I kind of summarize this in my table that's coming up. So each rising sign, based on what the 12th house owns, and the planet that owns the 12th house will create qualities and blocks to the 12th house. So Aries, Taurus rising, Aries is the 12th house. That creates strong sexual or uncontrollable sexual energy. That's what happens with Mars, right? Taurus Gemini rising, Taurus owns the 12th house, never feeling love, seeking to be loved by women, and problems with relationships and romance. Gemini, Cancer rising, Gemini owns the 12th house, problems with intellectual focus of mind, double expenditures, spending problems with material. So I summarize these. You can go through them. This is cookbook stuff. But I think this section is very important because when you're talking about blocks to moksha, or what are the blocks in the 12th house that have to be released, you have to go into the summary that I'm about to go into. This was in the article that I wrote. We're not going to have time to look to see if you're going to get enlightened in your chart, but sometime we can do that in the spiritual astrology class. But I wanted to go over this set of slides here. So this was something that I synthesized myself yesterday. Don't ask me where it came from. Jupiter was stationary, you know, and somehow the stuff was just kind of flowing through me. But so I was trying to synthesize what are the major blocks to moksha, which are, you know, these are not only blocks to motion, they're blocks to freedom. If you don't believe in enlightenment or spirituality, you know, 12th house stuff is imprisonment. So it blocks freedom. So what are our blocks to freedom? So I kind of summarize them in this table. Sexual overindulgence, that's the energy going up. We want the energy to go up to create moksha, and if it goes down, then it creates, again, it creates a lot of fun, but it eventually creates a lot of problems. And so Geminis, Tauruses, and Scorpios have problems with sexual energy, and if they don't find spirituality and the energy keeps going down, it spirals into major sexual problems. So that's how I kind of summarize that problem. Another problem with 12th house is overspending. You get Jupiter or Venus in the 12th house, or even maybe Rahu. You don't have to, you spend too much money and then you get into debt, and then the fear about money blocks you from being free because you always have debts and you always have hidden enemies, the debt collectors coming after you if you don't save your money properly. So sometimes when you have Venus and Jupiter in the 12th, you have to teach people to manage their money and to save money, otherwise there's no freedom and they're blocked, and that creates a lot of problems. Another problem to moksha or freedom is worries about hidden enemies, throwing our sense of safety off. So Mars, 6th house is enemies, right? 12th house is hidden enemies. So if you get Mars connected to the 12th house, or Mars in the 12th house or something like that, or the 6th house Lord connected to the 12th house Lord, you know, there's this kind of anxiety about enemies. And it's interesting, I have a yoga that prevents this from happening. I have Mars in Aries in the 6th and Saturn exalted in the 12th. Now, you would think I have a problem with hidden enemies, but because Mars is in the 6th in Aries in its own sign, and Saturn is exalted in the 12th, I actually have the opposite problem. I don't have problems with enemies, and actually I overthrow them, and I actually see them coming from before they show up. 12th house stuff is about our blind spots, and our blind spots create bad judgment. You know, so when you see things in the 12th house, it means we may have a blind spot about something, and that may be expenditures, it may be sexuality, it may be the karaka, or the symbol of the planet in the 12th house. So maybe you have Sun in the 12th house or something like that. Maybe that creates a problem, a blind spot about your father. I mean, you may think he's not a problem, but he's really a problem, you know. You probably have learned that over the years, something like that. So, or if yes, Sun is also kind of boss or government. If it's Sun in the 12th house, maybe you don't see that your boss is after you and you act out and you get fired. So that's the type of problem, bad judgment, blind spots. We really need to, I really need to want to go deeper with point D, and I don't think we're going to have enough time, but I think that's how you can help people most, is helping see their blind spots. We'll look at your chart and see what your blind spots are. Checking out is a block to moksha. What happens is we have deep unconscious patterns coming up. from the past. They create such turmoil in our emotional life and our psychology that we end up in a mental breakdown. We end up in the hospital. We can't deal with it. We check out. I've seen this happen a lot with me. If my Saturn gets really afflicted, especially when it's going through my 12th house in Sadi Sat, you know, I was watch a lot of TV. I was eating a lot of food. I wasn't taking drugs or alcohol, but I was basically checking out. Usually people can't deal with 12th house stuff. They don't. Our society doesn't teach us or give us the tools to deal with 12th house stuff. We check out. We watch TV. We overeat. We go into drugs and alcohol or sex addiction. You have to help people with that. They have to heal those unconscious patterns. They have to explore them. They have to understand them. Self-punishment can be a 12th house affair. We talked about that already. I think Libras and Aries have that problem, particularly with, you know, because Mars owns the 1st and the 8th for Aries, and Venus owns the 1st and the 8th for Libras, and so there's a tendency to kind of be self-sabotaging, to be really caught up in your past because of the 1/8 connection. 8th house is also a moksha house too, as we learned last week. And then a lot of problems with moksha or being free is learning to balance our material and spiritual realms. The proper use of expenditure versus time for service. Leos have a real problem with this. I mean, they're a very material sign. They want to be in the world. They have a lot of ambition, and they have a deep spirituality, and they have trouble bringing out that spirituality because of their material quest. And they're kind of balancing. They're always balancing the spiritual and the material. And you know, the trick for Leos, again, is going to be to get into service work, volunteer on the weekend to help people, and that helps you get into that service aspect, which is needed to balance out the material quest and the ambitiousness. Again, I wrote it. We could spend a lot more time on this. I want to. So the key to moksha is sacrifice and service, busy hands, full heart, giving up the ego, self-indulgence. We need to give up self-indulgence and blaming others. We have to work through our malefic planets, vices, and our influence. We have to activate the positive qualities of the 12th house. Take up meditation, service activities. What I didn't have time to talk about is if we have a 12th house imprisoned planet, we have to let it out of prison. So, and what that means is, let's say you've got Venus in the 12th house. Well, they may have trouble not feeling beautiful enough or not feeling good enough about their artistic qualities. So you have to encourage them to go to art school or to go, you know, to the beautician, or to, you know, take care of their beauty. Again, depending on the sign that it's in, you know, it may have more problems. But so whatever planet is locked in the 12th house, you have to unlock it by having them do the thing that they can't do, and that's why it's so hard. You know, Mars in the 12th house will have trouble being an athlete or being competitive. You have to put them into sports. You have to, you know, I have children, you know, I see, you know, they have Mars in the 12th house, and the kids, you know, the kids may be a brainiac and stuff like that, but they have trouble being accepted by their peers, and you have to, you know, tell the parents to get them on the sports team, and it'll be hard, but they'll grow. So whatever, in a sense, 12th house is kind of like a growth house, like the 6th house, in that if you work really hard to get through the things that are really hardest to do in your life, you get out of prison. So that's what you have to do. Sleep. Sleep is you know, sleep disturbances. You have to look at the 12th house. You put Venus or Jupiter in the 12th house. I have exalted Saturn. I sleep really well. Put Mars or Rahu in the 12th house. You know, you're going to have trouble with sleep. You can help people get through these problems if you understand Ayurveda and things like that. We talked about this a little bit, unlocking hidden problems in the 12th house. It's 5 o'clock. Rahu, you really have to get them involved in meditation or going to the ashram, otherwise they're going to really get into trouble. Rahu in the 12th, I think, is the hardest one, absolutely, especially if it's afflicted. Jupiter, you have to get them involved in education and teaching. They may lack interest in material development. Saturn, maybe they give too much to charity. They actually, they may be too involved in seva. I mean, actually, that's my problem. I actually, spent half of my business life doing seva, and I didn't build my business. And here I am at 62, and I spent too much time on seva, and I don't regret any of it. It's really good for moksha, but it was out of balance. 12th house Saturn creates an easiness in life. And then even, I still have that sometimes. Saturn needs meditation and yoga. Sun, abandoned and unsupported self-pleasure and victim through volunteering, secretive, unavailable father. Key is fathering others. You get Sun in the 12th house. It's a man, they've got to like join Big Brother and and help father another kid. Or if they have a nephew, they need to be a father for that child. Fathering they need to be disciplined about sexual energy too. Moon, problems with not feeling nurtured. You've got to nurture others to get out of the 12th house. You've got to be a mother to others. You've got to donate to women's charities, all those things. Mercury stuck in the 12th house. You've got to keep writing a journal, right? You may have, we just talked about this one, right? Key remedies for healing, writing and publishing, doing Toastmasters. Mercury in the 12th house probably may have trouble with public speaking, right? So what's the best remedy for that? Send them to Toastmasters, learn how to become a speaker. Hardest thing in the world for them. Number one fear in the world is fear of speaking in public. I mean, they won't be able to do it, but if you do it, then you'll become a master Toastmaster, and you'll be free from jail. Venus in the 12th house, you have to watch your expenditures. You have to do artistic and fashion creativity. Singing and dancing will get Venus out of the 12th house. Okay, so let me, so here I am again. I cut down the lesson in half so that I knew we needed a whole lesson to get through the 12th house, and here we are at 5 o'clock, and we still could talk some more. So any questions? Isn't this stuff fascinating? The 12th house has to be your favorite house now, right? Because it's so rich, it's enlightenment, it's your hidden talents, it's getting through your biggest blocks so that you're free. So if you can learn to talk about the 12th house in a new way now, it's not a problem house, it's an opportunity house, right?
So would you say it represents the subconscious in the chart?
Yes, it does represent the subconscious. It may be deep past life patterns that you don't understand either. Although 8th house is more past life, but 12th house, I think sometimes is really deep. The whole chart is past life, karma, right? So I think 12th house is even deeper past life karma, because if you get through it, then you get enlightened. And you may not get through your 12th house stuff. I mean, I'm 62 and I'm still working on my 12th house stuff. I've done a lot of seva. I've done a lot of meditation. It's helped an awful lot. I'm still not I'm still not through all my 12th house stuff. And I put in that article that I wrote, if you read it, my spiritual teacher, he'll just look at you and he'll tell you what you need to do, and it's usually the blocks to your moksha. So the 2 or 3 things he told me to do, he said, why don't you bring me a poem every time you see me? And I did. He wanted me to write poetry because somehow one of the keys to moksha in my chart is writing poetry, because there's a connection between my 3rd and my 12th house. And yet I'm so hard on myself with Saturn that I blew up my poetry teacher, in fact, so I self-sabotaged my relationship with the only person who could help me with my poetry. it's very hard. And I know I need to write poetry. I'm writing everyday astrology. That's my poetry. So that's lately what's coming out. He also told me to move to the ashram. Okay, 12th house, ashram. Saturn in the 12th house, difficulties with the ashram. If I move to the ashram, I'll probably have a horrible time, and I'll probably get enlightened if I do it. But that's the problem. The things in the 12th house you don't want to do are what you have to do. How do you get through it? You have to have incredible courage. You have to have benefic aspect in your 12th house, and you have to find the courage to move forward. Yeah, I love the 12th house too, Carol. I did this whole lesson so that you'd all love the 12th house. I have my Atma Karaka in the 12th house. I know the 12th house really well. I don't know if anybody's going to teach you about the 12th house more, but I've really enjoyed doing this lesson, so I hope you enjoyed it. So next week we're going to do multiple levels of existence, and it's going to be interesting for me to put that together and teach it to you. Can you let me know right now, or let me know how many of you are willing to present in Class 8, because I'd like you to go through your charts from all the lessons that we've learned and go deeper into your charts and explain your charts to the class from your life experience and showing how the principles that we've learned are showing up. Are you open to doing that? I mean, you know your own life, and many of you know your own charts pretty well. So this isn't hard. I'm not going to give you a test to do my chart or somebody else's chart. You can, if you don't want to do your own chart, you can do a family member's chart that you know really well. But how many of you are willing to do that? Because I have to kind of plan time for that 8th house. I'd really like you all to do it. It's when we have to teach that we learn the most. In fact, these classes are my advanced technique for getting deeper and becoming a better astrologer. When I have to teach this stuff, I have to really dig the stuff out of my unconscious and bring it into writing clarity. So I'm going to encourage you to kind of teach us about your chart. Okay, I'll help you, give you some guidelines on what you can do. It may just be taking simple principles like, I've got this planet and I've got all these planets in Taurus, and so that gives me, all these Taurus, luck of blessings of materiality or things like that. It may be something simple like that. And it also could be talking about yourself. Okay, great, Sonora. I'm glad you'll be happy. Partho, I know you will too, right? I'm counting on you. I don't know where Partho went. Kathy here, good. Okay. And the people who aren't able to come because they live in foreign countries, we'll see if we can make a guest appearance and see if I can get. So anyway, we will meet next week. I don't know if I'll have many readings for you because no one's written about this material. There are a couple of books that I'll draw upon, but there's not too much on this idea of multiple levels of reality. So until next week, have a great day. Bye.